Tyrone Guthrie is in the studio here with us with his ideas on drama pretty clarified, I imagine, because he's been spending the last year or so writing a book about his work in the theatre, which is due to be published next week. You make no secret of the fact in your book that you regard any production as a purely personal interpretation by the producer. What I'd like to ask you is, do you therefore get irritated, because you betray no sign in the book, do you therefore get irritated when you are yourself criticized by critics for bringing too personal and possibly too idiosyncratic a view to bear on plays, Shakespeare, Ibsen, whatever?
No, I think sometimes they may be right, but I think in general that sort of criticism suggests an ignorance of the interpretative process altogether, because you can't avoid making a comment. If you and I both read the same book, we shall make a different comment upon it, and if we had to interpret the book in some other form, our interpretations would be quite different. Whether you want to or not, you can't help making a comment, and a performance is a comment on a play, even an unimportant play, and the more important the play, the greater the work, the wider divergence of comment it permits.
Not all comments, presumably, are equally valid.
I don't think any comment is totally valid. Nobody can get all that's there, I think, if it's a work of some substance, like Macbeth, say.
There is no such thing as a perfect production.
There's no such thing as a perfect
Macbeth.
production. There's no such thing as a right production. There's no such thing as a right way. There are just masses and masses of wrong ways, some of them wronger than others.
Which include the Guthrie way and so on. And if the Guthrie...
Yes.
Yes. Have you ever had in mind a play, any kind of play, which you consider to be a good play, which hasn't yet had the interpretation that it should have? Hasn't yet had the comment made upon it? Do you think it should have made upon it sometime?
Yes. I think such a play is Barry's Peter Pan. In my opinion, a great play, possibly even in the masterpiece class, which was done first around 1904, I'm not sure of the exact date, in a production by Dion Boucicault, and a magnificent production which has been the basis for all revivals since. They do it in the old scenic setup and with what successive stage managers can remember of Boucicault's production, which was no doubt made in close collaboration with the author, and I imagine represents pretty accurately Barry's conscious intention about the play. But I think it's time now that it was seen afresh and interpreted in the light of psychoanalysis and all sorts of ideas which Freud and others have put into our heads, and that we should try a little to take the lid off Barry and show not just his conscious idea, but that Peter Pan is a projection of himself and aspects of himself of which he wasn't aware.
I suspect that if you produced it, that this would become rather a frightening play, perhaps.
I certainly think it should. I think this is a frightening play. It has various very frightening theatrical moments on the conscious side, as, for instance, the great moment in the first act, which, as you remember, is set in the nursery of the Darling family, and Mrs. Darling and Mr. Darling go out for the evening, but first she tucks the children up and puts the sweet little things to bed, and each little bed has a nightlight over it. The parents go, the music begins, the nightlights fade and gradually die out, which is, I think, quite symbolic and interesting. And then the nursery window flies open, and silent as a moth and deadly as a bomber flies in Peter Pan from the darkness outside. And then the mischief really begins. Well, when Boucicault did this, Peter Pan, and the tradition has always been followed ever since, Peter Pan is played by a charming young or youngish actress.
Yeah.
And that softens it all off and makes it quite sentimental, I think.
You see it played by a boy?
I think this should be played by quite an upstanding boy on the verge of manhood. Then the point is severely made if you see this potentially fine young man rejecting maturity and saying, I'm a boy who doesn't want to grow up, and searching everywhere for...
This is literally about a boy who doesn't want to grow up, you mean? Yes, I see.
Yes. On the conscious plane, it's about a boy who wants to grow up, but it's treated sentimentally and sweetly with a woman playing the boy.
Yes.
But really this boy is Sir James B., I think. And Mrs. Darling and Captain Hook are the same ogre.
Yes. It's a play about immaturity. I can see it would be frightening.
It's a play about refusing to grow up and accept the responsibilities of mature life.
It would make our Christmases very different if you got your hands on it. That's all
Yes,
I
it
can
would.
say.
I don't think it would any longer be a matinee play for kids.
No, neither do I. Let's come back to this central proposition. I can't remember whether it emerges in your book, but I imagine you would agree that it isn't necessarily the producer overwhelmingly who makes the comment. I imagine that, for example, in Hamlet, which is very much an actor's play, you wouldn't regard the actor as a puppet, but you would agree that an actor can make a comment.
Absolutely. In Hamlet, and indeed in most of the great Shakespearean plays, the most important person in the interpretation is the leading actor. The production must be around him.
Can I push in a question here and just ask you who you think in this last generation or two of Hamlets has made the most valid, the most potent comment as an actor?
Well, of course, this is, again, it's a subjective matter. Nobody is to say it is the most potent. I can tell you that the most potent and the most interesting for me was John Gielgud, by far.
Why?
Because in personality, he has much that corresponds to what I think Hamlet is meant to be. Mm. His interpretation and mine may be wrong. I can't stress that too often. Mm. And he has two or three very valuable assets. First of all, he has been for some time, and still is, easily our best verse speaker, I think, our finest rhetorician. Mm. Not necessarily the greatest impersonator, but the most musical and sensitive speaker of verse. Yes. Yeah. Then he's extremely witty, and obviously it's a very alert, quick mind, which is right for Hamlet.
Brilliant, even.
Brilliant, even. And he easily assumes, indeed I'm not sure now that it is an assumption, his manner is extremely royal. That's also in key.
Yes, it's a play about a prince.
It is.
What did you, how did you see the Olivier film? I'm not talking about the production on the stage, which I think you yourself did with Olivier, but the Olivier Hamlet as compared with the Gielgud one.
Well, the film seemed to me to be untrue to its own premise. It began, you remember, by saying this is a story of a young man who couldn't make up his mind. Mm. Then we saw a quite mature knight in a yellow wig or with his hair dyed yellow, looking the very picture of a Nazi Gauleiter, who not only couldn't make up his mind, but was prepared to shoulder everybody who came between him and his goal into the abyss, regardless of age, class, sex, or weight. And occasionally the whole thing stopped, and this same figure gave vent to some reflective sentiments which seemed to be coming out of an entirely different nature. Yes. Well, it's true, of course, Hamlet is about a play about a young man who can't make up his mind, and it is also true that this is a very resolute and capable fellow, because he proves again and again that he is capable of extremely firm action.
He demonstrates, doesn't he, that he's capable of very firm action on every conceivable front except one, isn't this right?
Exactly. He can't carry out the ghost's command to avenge the death of his father on his uncle. Well, that's the paradox. And that's what commentators have been arguing about for 300 years. How, why should this paradox be? And it seems to me that Shakespeare may possibly have been dramatizing an instance of this very paradox that he can't fail to have observed, because it was the most prominent person of his time, namely Queen Elizabeth I. She was a very resolute and capable person, yet in two important respects, both for her own personal life and for the safety and health of the whole realm, she was either unable or unwilling, or both, to make up her mind.
Yes.
And I'm referring to her marriage, and or the marriage that she never made, and her foreign policy.
Yes, yes.
And she, like Hamlet, must have hearkened to with respect and fear and awe to the words of her father's ghost, be it the real ghost speaking to her in dreams of her real father, Henry VIII, or the more material presence of her father figure, Lord Burleigh.
Forgive my putting it in this way, but is this your own idea, or have you?
I'm under the impression it's my own idea, but where Hamlet's concerned, you generally think you've had great original ideas, and then discover that 6 books have already been written on the subject.
You haven't actually read about it?
I haven't read about it, but that isn't to say that lots of other people haven't mentioned it.
How serious are you about this? If you were doing another production of Hamlet, I don't know, you must have done 2 or 3.
Oh, it couldn't show at all. This would be part of the mental and imaginative background that one would discuss with the actor and talk over and exchange views about, but I don't think this would be apparent in the play possibly.
In the production of Hamlet of yours, which we all remember, that's the Alec Guinness one, you approached the whole thing very differently. It was neither the Queen Elizabeth idea, nor was it the Sir John Gielgud royal idea quite, was it? It was a very tortured Hamlet that we had.
We were both, Alec Guinness and myself at the time, very much under the spell of the psychoanalyst, Dr. Ernest Jones, and had both discussed the play with him and read with great attention his book, which I think is a masterpiece, Hamlet and Oedipus, in which he attempts to explain the thing in terms of psychoanalysis. And I think perhaps we got a little too much into the maze of psychoanalysis and the unconscious ideas that are floating about, so that it all became, as you say, a little bit too introverted and tortured. We just went too far on the right track.
Yes, going too far on the right track is a danger, after all, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's really, if you go too far, it's as bad going on the right track as the wrong, if you run over the buffers.
Yeah. Can I ask you, finally, quite where you stand in the end? It's absolutely clear from your life, and of course from this book, that you've done a great deal of work in the non-commercial theatre. Let's call it the non-commercial theatre. You've encouraged national theatre movement here, there, and everywhere, and have encouraged experimental and avant-garde plays with all sorts of companies all over the world. And on the other hand, you've also been concerned with great commercial successes, and flops for that matter, on Shaftesbury Avenue and on Broadway. And the feeling I got a little bit, I think, from the book was that you were pretty sardonic about both the commercial and the non-commercial theatre. In the end, are you prepared to be pushed into one camp or the other?
No. I think I don't want to be pushed into any corner. I stand between the two. I don't think commercial success, or indeed just success, is a very important aim. We all know that some of the plays that are most successful aren't particularly meritorious, and that some of the plays that meet with no success at all ought to have. Equally, I hate to think of the theatre as educational, as being around to do people good, or even to be of social significance and rather priggish talk like that. I think the business of the theatre is no more than to take people out of themselves, to give them, for the stretch of the 2 hours, a good stretch of the imagination.
Yes.
After all, it has to be taken for a walk, just like a dog on a Sunday afternoon. It goes bad if it doesn't get stretched.
Lift is what you're after, rather than moral uplift.
Precisely. Well, moral uplift has its reverse. If you're uplifted, then later on you must be downcast.
Yes. Delight.
Delight.
Dr. Guthrie, thank you very much indeed.